There have been many legendary professional wrestling dynasties, from the Guerreros and the Von Erichs to the Harts and the McMahons themselves. But of all the great families to have graced the business, none have produced as many notable sports entertainers as the extended Anoa'i clan. The Samoans often portrayed wild men in the ring, using their incredible size, strength and athleticism while playing up the savage stereotype. Their work has won them plaudits and ensured that family members typically have jobs or at least receive opportunities on the biggest stages. Away from the spotlight, however, the Anoa'i family have, at times, struggled with life in the civilian world, these struggles occasionally landing them in trouble with the law and, every now and again, behind bars in a jail cell. The Anoa'i family deserve to be celebrated for their enormous contributions to the wrestling industry, an industry that would look very different without them. But as this legacy continues to be pushed in major storylines on WWE television, it's worth remembering, or simply noting for those unfamiliar, that their path to the top was not always a smooth, incident-free ride. On the contrary, the Anoa'i family, either those born into it or those who became members by marriage, are no strangers to controversy and have had a fair few criminal convictions in their history that many fans may know nothing about. The Anoa'i family's documented criminal history begins in December of 1970, and it begins with a tragedy. On Christmas Day 1970, Afa Anoa'i, who had not long since made his in-ring debut but would go on to have a Hall of Fame career with his brother Sika in the Wild Samoans tag team, was involved in an incident that turned deadly. According to reports in the Argus, a newspaper for the town of Fremont, California, Afa became involved in an altercation that escalated and resulted in a 50-year-old man being sent to the hospital. Per the reports, Afa punched Fremont resident James P. Reagan at about 4:50 p.m. following a dispute over parking spaces. The two men had been arguing about cars being parked in a manner that other vehicles couldn't get out. Specifically, it was over blocking a driveway by visitors to Reagan's neighbor, a 36-year-old man named Leonard Patton. The reports cited witness accounts that Patton first slapped Reagan in the face, after which the 27-year-old Afa struck him, rendering him unconscious. Reagan, it should be noted, was described as being a 156-pound church gardener. Reagan was rushed to the Kaiser Hospital in Hayward, California, where he was treated for internal injuries. Unfortunately, he succumbed to his injuries on December 27th. Afa was charged with felony manslaughter for the Christmas Day incident and pleaded innocent when appearing in municipal court on January 26, 1971. Despite his plea, on July 23rd, Afa was arraigned on a charge of second-degree murder after the Superior Court ruled that manslaughter was not the correct legal charge. At a later hearing, Deputy District Attorney John Burke argued to Judge Roy G. Pucci that Afa had acted neither in the heat of passion nor with diminished capacity, so that malice was inferred. However, the judge disagreed and said that Reagan had died due to a spontaneous quarrel and reduced the charge against Afa to involuntary manslaughter. On January 12, 1973, the Oakland Tribune reported that an Alameda County Superior Court jury had found Afa guilty of involuntary manslaughter, with Judge Gordon Minder scheduling sentencing for February 2nd. The Oakland Tribune article also noted that, at the time of the crime, Afa was on parole for armed robbery in Alameda and the Contra Costa counties. Ultimately, Afa would not do any time for his involvement in Reagan's senseless and utterly avoidable death. He was given a suspended prison sentence and put on probation for 5 years. Judge Minder also ordered him to pay Reagan's family $3,500 as well as $75 a month in child support for his third child, who was living with a grandmother. A former US Marine, Afa would continue to wrestle around the world for the rest of the decade, eventually becoming a regular with the World Wrestling Federation. When his active in-ring career came to an end, he became a trainer and gave starts to future stars such as Batista. In a 1998 interview with Allentown, Pennsylvania newspaper The Morning Call, Afa said that part of the reason he opened his school was to get wayward youths off the streets and stop them succumbing to drugs and a life of crime. Afa Anoa'i passed away on August 16, 2024 at the age of 80. Fiji-born high flyer Jimmy Snuka was a member of the Anoa'i family by marriage, having wed Sharon Georgie in 1964. Georgie was the daughter of a Samoan chief who was blood brothers with Peter Maivia and Reverend Anoa'i, effectively making her their niece. Though Snuka was married to Georgie, he had what newspapers referred to as a travelling companion during the early 1980s. Nancy Argentino was Snuka's girlfriend and mistress and accompanied him on the road while Snuka was working as one of WWE's main attractions. As well as being his girlfriend, she also provided the function of driving Snuka from arena to arena, as he didn't have a license and most of the locker room refused to travel with him due to his irrational, often drug-fueled behaviour. Their relationship was tempestuous, and one particular incident resulted in Superfly being taken to jail. At around 2 a.m. in the morning of January 18, 1983, police were called to the Howard Johnson Motor Lodge in the town of Salina, New York, after receiving a call from night manager Thomas Donovan about a woman screaming. Guests in an adjoining room had called the front desk to complain of loud noise and what they said was a male beating up a female. Police showed up to find the then 39-year-old Snuka and the 22-year-old Argentino in the hallway arguing. According to reports, Snuka was either naked or wearing only his underwear, while Argentino was covered by a sheet. Argentino told officers that Snuka had returned from a match in Elmira when he became angry with her as she was ignoring him while he tried to talk to her about the truth of God. Argentino made it clear that she wanted to get away from her boyfriend, but he ignored her and the officers and dragged Argentino back into their room before slamming the door. Deputies called for additional help and forced the door open. Snuka resisted, pushing one officer against the wall before another officer placed a nightstick against Snuka's throat as others worked to get him in handcuffs. All told, it took a total of 9 officers and 2 police dogs, one of which accidentally bit an officer on the thigh during the scuffle, to properly subdue him. Snuka was then dragged to a police car in his underwear after refusing to put on clothes. Snuka was charged with assault, attempted assault, resisting arrest, and obstruction, and held in the county jail before being released on a $5,000 bond. Argentino, meanwhile, was taken to the hospital with injuries to her head, back, and scalp from being dragged by her hair. Snuka ended up plea bargaining down and pleading guilty to just one charge of harassment that April in Salina Town Court. He also paid a $15 fine and around $1,500 to the Ronald McDonald House Charity, a favourite of Sheriff John Dillon. Justice Herman Harding gave Snuka a 1-year conditional discharge. Following a main events match at a house show in Syracuse on April 7th, Snuka publicly apologized for the January incident in front of the live crowd. Publicly, Superfly was repentant. Argentino had initially sought prosecution, with an officer's note saying that Vince McMahon had attempted to talk her out of making an official complaint. However, she made up with her man despite the protestations of her family and continued to travel with him around the Northeast. It was a decision that would prove deadly. On May 10, 1983, Snuka performed at a television taping at the Lehigh County Agricultural Hall in Allentown, Pennsylvania. After finishing his last match for the evening, he returned to the George Washington Motor Lodge in nearby Whitehall, where he found Argentino gasping for breath. Snuka called for an ambulance at 11:47 p.m, but it was in vain. Despite the ambulance crew working on her feverishly at the scene, Nancy Argentino passed away 2 hours later at the Lehigh Valley Hospital Center. The cause of death was due to complications of a skull fracture. Upon viewing the body, County Coroner Wayne immediately suspected foul play and notified the district attorney. Given the couple's history and the fact that he had placed the call, Snuka was labelled as the only suspect in her death and brought in for questioning. Yet, after being questioned, Snuka was released while an autopsy determined that Nancy had died due to injuries sustained in a fall. However, there were marks of abuse all over Argentino's body, including over 24 cuts and bruises, leading many to speculate that her death was not simply the result of an accidental head injury, which Snuka claimed to law enforcement occurred when the two of them pulled over to the side of the road to relieve themselves earlier in the day and Nancy slipped, having initially told officers that he had pushed her during some rough horseplay. Investigators were looking to ascertain whether the fall was accidental or part of an intentional act. However, after an investigation that lasted just a couple of weeks, the decision was made not to file charges against Snuka, and officially the case was left open. Snuka would have further issues with the law, however, when WWE toured the Middle East in 1984 and 85. On one tour, Snuka was reportedly involved in a fight at a hotel regarding his behaviour with a woman. On another tour in Kuwait, Snuka was caught with cocaine strapped to his body by customs officials and was only permitted to leave the country after some costly mediation from WWE officials. On yet another occasion, Snuka was found with cocaine and this time sent to jail. It took Rocky Johnson, who supposedly had some sway with a Saudi Arabian king, to get him out of there. This escalation in irrational and destructive behaviour was the end of the line for Snuka, who had undergone a stint in rehab prior to these incidents, and WWE let him go. That same year, the family of Nancy Argentino, who never accepted what the Allentown authorities had told them regarding her death, hired a private investigator and filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Snuka. They won a default $500,000 judgment against Snuka, who filed for bankruptcy in Hawaiian courts later that year and never paid. Though Snuka was never formally charged in the death of Nancy Argentino, interest in the case remained high. That interest was reignited by a 2013 article in the Allentown Morning Call newspaper, which included a pathologist's report that gave the recommendation her death should be investigated as a homicide. The case was reopened, and following a grand jury investigation, Snuka was arrested and charged with third-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter on September 1st, 2015. The grand jury said they came to the decision based on new witnesses coming forward, coupled with Snuka's own inconsistent statements about the incident over the course of 3 decades, including in his 2012 ghost-written autobiography. A demonstrable history of domestic violence against not only Argentino but his ex-wife Georgie was another factor. They concluded that Snuka repeatedly and brutally beat Nancy Argentino on May 10, 1983, then allowed her to lie in bed while he went to wrestle and failed to get her the medical attention that could have potentially saved her life. 2 months after being charged, Snuka pleaded not guilty. Sadly, Argentino's family would not get their long-awaited day in court. On June 1, 2016, Judge Kelly Banach ruled that Snuka, who had been battling stomach cancer and was reportedly suffering from dementia, was not mentally competent to stand trial. On January 3, 2017, the charges against Jimmy Snuka were dismissed. He died of stomach cancer just 12 days later, at the age of 73. Canadian-born Wade Douglas Bowles began his professional wrestling career in 1964, becoming a major star in various territories as Rocky Johnson. The Soul Man made WWE history when, in a match taped on November 15, 1983, he and Tony Atlas became the first black men to win championships in the company when they defeated the Wild Samoans to bag the tag team titles. Johnson had married Anoa'i Family, daughter of Lia Maivia, and then adopted by her husband, High Chief Peter Maivia. After the Soul Patrol had dropped the tag titles, Rocky Johnson's professional wrestling career entered a downswing. And while wrestling for the Tennessee-based CWA promotion in the fall of 1987, Johnson was accused of violating a 19-year-old woman who was a huge wrestling fan and had, according to her sister, been talking to Johnson about going to wrestling school. Per reports, the woman said that Johnson and 3 other men assaulted her in a car, a blue pickup truck belonging to another man, in a rural area of Madison County on September 21st. Records showed that Johnson wrestled a match at the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis on that date. The woman further claimed that the 4 men forced her to become drunk before carrying out the assault, though nobody else was charged in relation to the alleged crime. Johnson was arrested and then released after posting a $10,000 bond. The belief within the business was that charges would be dropped since the woman changed her story numerous times after initially going to the police. Johnson himself believed that he had been set up by rival wrestlers. Johnson went back to work for the CWA promotion on October 5th, though his presence was played down on cards. He was never put over and didn't appear on the company's television afterwards. His last appearance for CWA came on November 1st at an event in Jackson, Tennessee, where he put over Hector Guerrero. In January, the grand jury in Tennessee concluded that they couldn't find enough evidence to indict Johnson, believing that the alleged victim's story didn't hold up to scrutiny. That same month, Johnson began working in Puerto Rico, although the run would be brief as his in-ring career was, for all intents and purposes, over. His run-ins with the law, on the other hand, were not. In September of 2000, while his son Dwayne was riding high as one of the biggest stars in WWE, Rocky Johnson was put under investigation for theft and harassment. According to an article in the Fort Lauderdale Sun-Sentinel, the then 56-year-old was accused of making improper comments towards women at the Pine Island Community Center, where he worked part-time as an activities leader and weight room supervisor, making $9.11 an hour as a town employee. He was also accused of taking home a boxing dummy that was worth $200 from the gym, though Johnson's lawyer Daniel Aronson claimed that that was a misunderstanding and that his client had been instructed to take it home by a supervisor so that he could then transfer it to another town fitness center the next day. Town officials had looked over sets of complaints before handing things over to police. No official charges were filed initially, though the investigation did get play in Davie, Florida, where Johnson was residing at the time. Not because of his superstar son or his own former glories though, but because of his friendship with the town's mayor, Harry Venus, who was apparently being trained to wrestle by Johnson. Rocky was due to be made a full-time employee when he was placed under investigation and suspended with pay instead. Things got worse for Johnson when a second article appeared in the Fort Lauderdale Sun-Sentinel 10 days after the first one. This new article provided more salacious details of just what exactly Johnson was being accused of. These allegations included unwanted sexual activity in a back room, unwanted groping of a female employee, illicit discussions of anatomy in front of children, and inviting a 12-year-old girl to play strip poker. Davie, Florida's Parks and Recreation Department Director Sharon Kent had questioned in memos to Town Administrator Tom Willey why Johnson was still being allowed to work around children after more people had come forward to substantiate the allegations. Johnson was also alleged to have conducted personal business while on the job, that he didn't keep his regular working hours, that he grabbed a female employee on the buttocks twice, that he asked the same employee to remove her top, and that he had spent time in the community center napping, kissing, and getting massages. In one incident, a 16-year-old girl allegedly walked in on Johnson getting a massage while a woman was straddling his back. In another, Johnson wore a t-shirt with the word puta, Spanish for prostitute, on it, prompting a complaint from a parent. There were other allegations too, all of which Johnson denied, as well as a bunch of politics and infighting within the town's office that didn't exactly help matters. Nonetheless, on March 16, 2001, the Broward County State Attorney's Office announced that they would not be pressing any charges against Johnson. The reason no charges were filed is because there were no eyewitnesses willing to come forward and give up their anonymity. An assistant state attorney in the prosecutor's office did say that they had found sufficient evidence to proceed with a charge of sexual battery and that a 23-year-old woman made a very credible witness, but that she wanted her name kept out of it and thus they were unable to proceed. After that, Johnson briefly became a trainer for Ohio Valley Wrestling, but was let go soon after. Inducted by The Rock into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2008, Johnson passed away on January 15, 2020 at the age of 75. On June 30, 2022, Sports Illustrated published a story documenting how Johnson had 5 other known children through other relationships he had had on the road, which was confirmed via DNA testing. Billed as a cousin of Jimmy Snuka, Samu Fatu gained notice in WWE during the mid-1980s as a member of the Islanders tag team with Haku. After teaming with Haku for 2 matches at a set of Superstars tapings in the Sundome in Tampa, Florida, on December 9, 1987, Fatu went out for a night on the town. He would end that night in jail. An article published in the December 11th edition of the Tampa Tribune reported that 3 wrestlers got into an after-hours brawl in the parking lot of the Sydney's nightclub, with 2 of the 3 being arrested for their involvement. The story noted that the 3 men were members of a party of about 15 wrestlers who entered the club at around 1 a.m. Club waitress Kimberly Lightheart stated that Fatu and the 2 other men sat away from everyone else drinking tequila and had caused an issue while inside when the 3rd unnamed man began shouting that he couldn't find his camera case. He subsequently picked up their table and threw it to the ground, smashing glasses in the process. A club employee was cut on the forehead by the glass but refused medical treatment. The 3rd unnamed man then realised that the case had been placed behind the bar for safekeeping and went to retrieve it, breaking 2 more glasses in the process before the 3 men went outside. Once in the parking lot, they proceeded to argue over who was the most sober one to drive, the argument soon degenerating into a full-on brawl. Fatu and Samu were both arrested and charged with fighting, a misdemeanor. The unnamed third man got away, though police said that the three men were related, narrowing down the list of suspects somewhat. After the death of her husband Peter Maivia in 1982, Lia Maivia began running the Polynesian pro wrestling promotion in Hawaii, which was a member of the National Wrestling Alliance. In doing so, she became one of the industry's first female promoters. Though there were some successes, including a card that featured the likes of Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes and Andre the Giant that drew around 20,000 fans, PPW was never a thriving territory and began to sharply decline before ultimately closing in 1988. In November of that year, Lia Maivia would be accused of extortion. Reports said that Maivia and two business associates were being accused by federal authorities of trying to extort money from a promoter who was seeking to run a show at the Blaisdell Arena in Honolulu. World Pacific Wrestling Association President Maivia, Ati So'o, described as the association's vice president, and Larry Hainimi, its secretary and treasurer who previously wrestled as Lars Anderson, were alleged to have extorted $1,800 from would-be promoter John R. Wakayama, also known as Dunbar, with the expectation he would pay them a further $3,200. Wakayama had previously worked for Maivia's promotion as a ring announcer, but intended to stage his own shows in a bid to revitalize Hawaii's flagging wrestling scene. The trio were initially held without bail after it was argued they posed a threat to the community and witness, but were then released on a $20,000 bond. They were also made to surrender their passports and told not to leave Hawaii, nor were they allowed to contact Wakayama, his family, or any other witnesses. Indicted on 2 counts of extortion each, all 3 entered pleas of not guilty. FBI agent Joseph F. Holtzlag Jr. claimed that they had demanded a $5,000 tribute from Wakayama to run his show, something that they had practiced before with others looking to run shows on the island. It was further alleged that Wakayama had been threatened with violence if he did not comply, and that threats had also been made against his 2 young children. As well as the $5,000, it was claimed that during their lunch at the Padoga Hotel restaurant that Maivia informed Wakayama that he would have to use 2 wrestlers being sponsored by her on his show, rent a ring for $1,100, and buy 3 commercials on Maivia's regular Saturday morning television show for $450. Per the FBI agent's affidavit, So'o had called Wakayama's business and left a threatening message following the restaurant meeting. Fearing for his safety, Wakayama went to the FBI and agreed to record subsequent meetings. The FBI tape-recorded a meeting between Wakayama, Maivia and Hainimi later that day at another restaurant, and then videotaped a meeting between the 3 at Wakayama's office. During the meeting at the restaurant, it was again reiterated that Wakayama must pay the tribute, while at his office, Maivia was recorded saying that So'o was the type of person who went bang bang and made a shooting gesture. Wakayama would recount how he initially thought Maivia had wanted $500, not $5,000, and likened the initial meeting to like being in a grade B gangster movie. Defense attorneys claimed that Wakayama had lost $60,000 on his wrestling venture and was trying to blame it on the defendants. The show Wakayama ended up producing only generated around $5,000. Maivia's attorney, William Brady, claimed that Wakayama was reading more into the situation and that his client was simply trying to procure a booking fee. Brooke Hart, an attorney for So'o, said that the only interaction he had had with Wakayama was at the initial restaurant meeting and that Maivia had used So'o's name without his knowledge when making threats. Wakayama, however, identified So'o as the man who made the threatening call, something that was backed up in court by the testimony of 51-year-old referee and former wrestler Fasamoa Mausali, who performed as Sam Samson. The defense attorneys contended that it was in fact Mausali himself who had made the threatening call. On November 27, 1989, the 3 defendants, who were facing a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison, were acquitted by a federal jury, who felt that So'o was not the threatening caller and agreed with the defense that Maivia was only asking for a booking fee and nothing else. After a 6-week trial, the jury deliberated for more than a day and a half before returning their verdict. An elated Maivia was quoted in the Honolulu Star-Advisor as saying, "I love the jury. God knows I'm a lady innocent." She also said she held no ill will towards Wakayama, saying, "He knows he's wrong, but he's still a friend. It's okay, I forgive him." According to her grandson Dwayne, the FBI came back around to Lia on illegal alien charges soon after and deported her back to Samoa while freezing what little assets she had. She was actually homeless come 1991 before Dwayne identified a loophole to get her legally back into the United States in '92. When he started making big money as The Rock several years later, he bought her a condo in Davie, Florida, where she lived until she passed away on October 19, 2008 at the age of 77. In 2024, Dwayne posthumously inducted her into the WWE Hall of Fame. On July 22, 2002, Eddie Fatu, brother of Rikishi and Sam Fatu, made his WWE main roster debut. As Jamal, Fatu appeared alongside his cousin Matt Anoa'i, aka Rosie, as the 3-minute warning tag team. Though they were pushed as a force to be reckoned with, the team's first few months were plagued with incidents where it was said that they, and Fatu in particular, were being reckless with their fellow wrestlers and other talents such as extras. For Eddie, things went from bad to worse when he was involved in an incident in a Pensacola, Florida bar on November 29th. The police description of the incident is that an off-duty officer named James Janes was working at the Seville Quarter nightclub when he attempted to remove a woman who was causing a disturbance after breaking a tip jar. That woman was Eddie's wife, Lia Fatu. Janes tracked Lia down as she was talking with her husband and explained to her that the club's management was requesting that she leave the premises. Lia refused, at which point the officer attempted to physically shepherd her out of the building. According to Janes, Eddie Fatu then took an offensive posture and warned him to take your hands off my effing wife. Despite being asked repeatedly to back up, Fatu instead advanced toward Janes with a clenched fist and slapped the officer's hand away while saying, "I will kill your effing ass, you redneck mother effer." Janes struck Fatu with his flashlight when the future Umaga began swinging. At this point, Shane Schrock, a 6'2", 200-pound bar patron, got involved and jumped on Fatu in an attempt to subdue him. It was reported that Fatu was yelling out to unnamed family members for help. During the incident, Janes was struck with a beer bottle in the shoulder. Fatu was ultimately arrested and charged with assault and battery on a law enforcement officer, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest with violence before he was taken to a local hospital for treatment. According to the police report, Fatu told Janes to kiss his family goodbye while both were at the hospital and made similar threats to 2 other officers who accompanied him in the ambulance. When WWE found out about the arrest, they suspended Fatu, albeit only from house shows and not television, which was company policy at the time. He continued to wrestle for WWE until his release in June of 2003. Though his firing wasn't the direct result of his arrest, it certainly contributed to the company's decision, with then talent relations head Jim Ross later saying that Fatu had to go away and mature and that they left the door open for his return. That return happened in 2006, after Fatu had enjoyed a fruitful spell on the indies and overseas for All Japan Pro Wrestling. It appeared that the Pensacola bar fight had not seriously impeded his career. Fatu's second run in WWE as the Samoan bulldozer Umaga would bring him his greatest fame. Regrettably, it came to an end in June of 2009 after Fatu had fallen afoul of the WWE wellness policy and was released once more after refusing to attend drug rehab. He sadly passed away mere months later on December 4th at the age of 36 after suffering 2 heart attacks. Following toxicology reports, it was determined that Fatu's history of drug use combined with heart disease had led to his premature death. In 2003, Anoa'i Jr., who would go on to have a brief run in WWE as Manu, was more concerned with a potential career in American football than his pro wrestling future, having verbally committed to attend the University of Connecticut. However, he didn't quite get the grades required and ended up attending a prep school in Virginia instead. He also got involved in a situation that threatened not just his collegiate football dreams, but his long-term future as a free citizen. In October of that year, it emerged that Afa Jr. was wanted by police as a suspect in the August 2nd robbery of 81-year-old Anoa'i Family. Anoa'i was believed to have acted as the getaway driver for the crime, which they say was committed on 11th Street in Bethlehem Township in Pennsylvania by 17-year-old Nicole Lee Transu and Ricardo Alessia. Police said that the two perpetrators climbed into an unlocked window and began going through drawers and cabinets looking for things to steal. They found a box containing $105,000 in savings bonds, as well as a certificate of deposit of $61,478. They also allegedly stole a purse, a television set, around $7,500 in jewelry, and other items including CDs and perfume. As they were robbing the place at around 4 o'clock in the morning, however, Cultaholic got up and confronted them. Brandishing a steak knife she had retrieved from the kitchen, Transu told Cultaholic to back off, but she attempted to tackle Transu and ended up being stabbed in the back and arm. Alessia then helped throw the 81-year-old into a closet and locked it as they ran off. Police got a lead when they found some of the stolen items at a local pawn shop and traced them back to Transu, who confessed to the crime on October 1st. Transu was charged with robbery, aggravated assault, burglary, criminal conspiracy, theft, receiving stolen property, simple assault, and reckless endangerment. Afa Jr., when hearing that police were after him, agreed to turn himself in to police in his hometown of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania on October 11th. He was charged with robbery, aggravated assault, simple assault, burglary, criminal conspiracy, theft, receiving stolen property, and reckless endangerment, and released without bail. Anoa'i told police that he didn't know what was going on with his friends and didn't participate in any activity. His attorney, John Caroli, claimed his client thought that Transu was retrieving something from her home when she and Alessia were actually robbing her neighbor. At a preliminary hearing on November 25th, several of the charges against Afa Jr. were dropped in what appeared to be a plea bargain in exchange for witness testimony. The only charge remaining was a misdemeanor of receiving stolen property. After convincing prosecutors that he didn't know what his two friends were up to, Afa was free to walk away and signed with the University of Connecticut in the summer of 2004, where he played as a defensive tackle. Transu, who did show remorse for the crime meanwhile, was sentenced to 21 to 42 months in the county prison. Northampton County Judge F.P. Kimberly McFadden also ordered her to undergo counseling and pay court costs, a $750 fine, and around $1,000 to Cultaholic. Alessia, meanwhile, was sentenced to 11 to 23 months. The post-WWE life of Rikishi, who also worked as the Sultan and Fatu, saw the former Intercontinental Champion work primarily for the Italy-based New Wrestling Evolution promotion, which he also acted as the booker for, as well as on the independent scene and a fleeting visit to TNA. Unfortunately, he also encountered a little bit of legal trouble. Rikishi, real name Samu Fatu Jr., was arrested at noon on Monday, September 5, 2006, during a traffic stop on Highway 98. He had a warrant out on him after failing to appear at a show cause hearing on September 1st, as he was in Italy for NWE at the time. Charged with contempt of court, Fatu was taken into custody, with one spokesperson saying he went without any resistance and that despite his size and the persona that goes with his profession, he was a gentleman. It transpired that the original charge he failed to show up in court for related to non-payment of back taxes, and authorities had been trying to find him for weeks. In a statement, Fatu said, "I am dealing with a private matter at this time that I am unable to discuss in detail. However, I am confident that my name will be cleared in a court of law soon. Additionally, I will say, make sure to have all business affairs in order and up to date, and do not trust anyone to handle for you, even if that person is your wife. I thank everyone for their continued support." In any event, Rikishi was soon out of prison and back to work. It appears that the matter was resolved and there is no record of him having any other legal issues either before or since. WWE have made no secret of Jacob Fatu's criminal past, though exact details of it remain sketchy. What is known is that Jacob, son of Samu Fatu, aka the Tonga Kid, spent several years in the Sacramento County Jail for committing either straight robbery or armed robbery. Reports vary. The Samoan werewolf has spoken in the past about how he hadn't had any interest in professional wrestling until he saw his cousins, the Usos, performing on WWE television while locked down in the prison dormitory. That was in 2010, when Fatu was 18 years old. He didn't spend too much longer in jail, as records show him making his debut for Uncle Rikishi's Nox Pro outfit on September 22, 2012. Jacob's criminal past had been seen as a barrier to him signing with WWE prior to him putting pen to paper in 2024. In July of that year, Paul Triple H Levesque reportedly had to pull some serious strings and hire a high-powered immigration lawyer in order to get Fatu to make an appearance at the Money in the Bank event, which took place in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. In June of 2010, it was reported that Laasi Joseph Anoa'i, son of Sika and cousin of Matt, aka former WWE star Rosie, had signed a developmental contract. What wasn't reported is that around the same time he inked the deal, the future Roman Reigns had been arrested. According to what little information about the arrest is out there, the Georgia Tech alumnus was taken into custody on June 20th in the Pensacola, Florida region. He was booked for disorderly intoxication and affray unlawful assembly or riots. Essentially, Reigns was put in handcuffs after appearing drunk in public and getting into a fight. He was released on a $1,000 bond and fined $500 for each offense. The arrest wasn't actually publicly known about until 2013, when his mugshot appeared on the website mugshots.com. Something tells me it would be a bigger story if it happened today. The Usos are now generally considered one of the greatest tag teams in WWE history, but it hasn't always been smooth sailing for twin brothers Jimmy and Jay. A lot of their issues have been to do with persistent driving-related offences, which stretch back to their early days on the main roster. Of the two, it is Jimmy, real name Jonathan Fatu, who has had more problems. His first arrest occurred at around 3 o'clock in the morning on September 29, 2011. According to reports, Jimmy was driving the wrong way down Howard Avenue in South Tampa when he was pulled over. The police report stated that he appeared glassy-eyed, was slurring his words, and failed multiple field sobriety tests. When given a breathalyzer, he blew a .180, over twice the state's legal limit. It was also noted in reports that Fatu's future wife Trinity McRae, aka Naomi, was in the car with him and that he was fined $256 for 2 minor traffic violations back in June. Jimmy pleaded no contest to the charges and was sentenced to probation. On March 13, 2013, it was reported that Jimmy had once again been arrested for DUI in Hillsborough County, Florida. The arrest was said to have been made at 12:47 p.m. and Uso was released on a $500 bond at 3:08 p.m. However, a subsequent statement from Jimmy's attorney, Keith Gone, claimed that those reports were false. According to Gone, Uso was erroneously charged with driving on a suspended license, along with a probation violation related to his prior DUI charge. Gone added, "We are extremely confident that once we get on the court's docket, Mr. Fatu's probation will be terminated and the citation for driving on a suspended license will be dismissed." Gone's statement noted that Jimmy had completed the terms and conditions of his probation and that this most recent arrest was Fatu turning himself into the Hillsborough County Jail so that a warrant could be set aside. An administrative mix-up perhaps, but Jimmy's troubles were far from over. 2019 was a rough year, starting with his arrest on the night of February 13th. Uso was charged with disorderly conduct and obstruction of justice following an incident that took place after the car he was sharing with his wife was pulled over at around 10:15 p.m. in downtown Detroit. The police report noted that Naomi was driving her Dodge Journey the wrong way down a one-way street when she was pulled over by police. Police said that they noticed the smell of alcohol in the car, and when they were talking to Naomi, Jimmy exited the vehicle and took off his jacket and shirt and assumed a fighting stance. An officer produced a taser and instructed Jimmy, who was described as being irate, to get back in the vehicle, to which he complied. He was then taken to jail where he was booked and released on bond. When news of the arrest hit the internet, WWE released a statement simply saying that Jonathan Fatu is responsible for his own personal actions. Evidently, WWE were not too upset at Jimmy, as he and Jay won the WWE Tag Team titles at the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view just 4 days later. Weeks afterwards, Detroit police released body cam footage of the incident in which Naomi admitted that her husband had drank a lot and was intoxicated, as well as showing Jimmy in handcuffs. On March 28, 2019, Jimmy Uso agreed to a plea deal in relation to the arrest. Speaking with TMZ Sports, his attorney John Freeman revealed that his client had pleaded no contest in exchange for paying a $450 fine. While that matter was put to bed with a simple fine, Jimmy's woes were not over for the year. At around midnight on July 24th, Jimmy was once again arrested on DUI charges in Pensacola, Florida, when an officer pulled him over after he was caught speeding and swerving left and right. Fatu, who reportedly smelled of alcohol, was said to have refused to take a field sobriety test when he was pulled over and was booked at the Escambia County Corrections Facility at around 3 a.m. before being released on a $1,000 bond. In a bitter piece of irony, the arrest came mere days after John Cena had made a joke about Jimmy's prior arrests on an episode of Raw. In December of 2019, Jimmy was found not guilty on the DUI charge after asking for and receiving a jury trial. Though it was reported that Uso had refused to take a field sobriety test, that turned out to not be exactly true. The officer had asked him to take one, and Jimmy had agreed if his lawyer could be present when he did so, a request which the officer on the scene, Deputy Jeremy Meeks, refused. Meeks had testified that Jimmy appeared to be having a hard time opening the door handle after he had been pulled over and took 2 steps before stumbling and almost falling into the travel lane. WWE had pulled the Usos and Naomi from the road following the incident, but while the speeding ticket remained on Jimmy's record, the not guilty verdict allowed them to come back to work. Though he received a favourable outcome in this case, Jimmy reoffended less than 2 years later. On July 5, 2021, Fatu was arrested at around 10:35 p.m. near his home in Pensacola, Florida. Police documents show that he was pulled over after being clocked going 50 miles per hour in a 35 miles per hour zone and running a red light. Officers smelled alcohol on Jimmy, who admitted to having consumed several beers while questioning him, and asked him to leave his Dodge Charger. He then failed a field sobriety test and blew a .202 and .205, more than double the legal limit, before being charged with misdemeanor DUI. Court records show that Uso cut a deal with prosecutors in early April 2022, pleading no contest to the charge. As part of his punishment, he was ordered to complete several courses related to the offense. Embarrassingly for Jimmy, TMZ published body cam footage of the arrest, which showed the belligerent WWE star swearing at a well-meaning officer who was earnestly wishing him well. Compared with his twin brother's rap sheet, Jey Uso, real name Joshua Samuel Fatu, is a saint. However, his record is not perfect, because on January 14, 2018, the then 32-year-old was pulled over and arrested in Hidalgo, Texas on a charge of driving while intoxicated. Jey was performing on WWE's tour of the Lone Star State and had competed at a live event in the area earlier that evening. According to the police report, Jey was pulled over by officers at around 1 a.m. for a traffic violation. He was given a field sobriety test where it was determined that he was under the influence. Taken to the station and booked in, Jey posted a $500 personal reconnaissance bond and was released that same day. In a statement 2 days later, WWE said Joshua Fatu is responsible for his own personal actions. We are investigating the matter and awaiting information from local law enforcement officials. Though he wasn't suspended, Jey was reportedly removed from a television promotion after his arrest. WWE also didn't punish Jey by having the Usos lose the WWE Tag Team titles, with the duo holding on to the belts until dropping them to the Bludgeon Brothers at WrestleMania 34 on April 8th. It seems that, given the lack of updates, Jey managed to walk away from his DWI arrest without suffering any severe consequences. Since he began training at Booker T's Reality of Wrestling School in December of 2022, there has been much speculation regarding the in-ring future of Zilla Fatu. Zilla is the son of Umaga, and while not too much is known about him, it is common knowledge that he served 6 years for aggravated robbery in the Texas State Penitentiary. Fatu was charged with the crime at the tender age of 15, claiming that his lifestyle led him to hit rock bottom after getting mixed up with the wrong crowd following the death of his father and his family falling into poverty. The details of the robbery have not been made available, likely because Zilla, real name Isaiah, was a juvenile at the time of it, but he was released in March of 2022, mere months before he decided to give the family business a try.